From the outside, everything in my life looked perfect. I had a loving husband, a beautiful home, and a successful career. But what people couldn't see was the darkness creeping into every corner of my life, threatening to pull me under. My name is Emily Brooks, and I'm 32 years old. I work as a marketing manager for a leading fashion brand, a job I've loved since I started 7 years ago. My work allowed me to be creative, and I thrived in the fast-paced environment. But while my professional life was flourishing, my personal life was beginning to unravel. I met my husband, Jack, at a company event. He was charming, confident, and made me feel like I was the only woman in the room. We quickly fell in love, and within a year we were married. Jack worked as a financial analyst for a large firm, and his job required him to travel often. I didn't mind. I was used to being independent and handling things on my own. But as time went on, I began to notice small cracks in our seemingly perfect life. It started with the little things. Jack would come home from his trips exhausted and irritable. He would snap at me for no reason, and then apologize later, blaming the stress of his job. I tried to be understanding, but the tension in our home was becoming unbearable. I found myself walking on eggshells, afraid to say the wrong thing or do something that might set him off. One evening, after Jack had returned from a particularly long trip, he asked me to sit down with him in the living room. His expression was serious, and I felt a knot form in my stomach. I had no idea what he was about to say, but I knew it wasn't good. "Emily," he began, "I've been thinking a lot lately, and I think it's time for us to make some changes." My heart raced. "What do you mean? What kind of changes?" Jack sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "I think we should move in with my parents for a while. They've been struggling financially, and I want to be there for them. Plus, it would save us some money, and I could help them out more." I was stunned. The thought of living with Jack's parents made me uneasy. They had always been kind to me, but they were very traditional, and I wasn't sure how I would fit into their world. But Jack was insistent, and I didn't want to argue with him. So I agreed. Within a few weeks, we packed up our things and moved into the small, cluttered house where Jack had grown up. His parents, Margaret and Harold, welcomed us with open arms, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The house felt stifling, and the atmosphere was tense, as if everyone was waiting for something to happen. At first, things were manageable. I continued to work from home, setting up my office in the guest bedroom. Jack's parents were polite but distant, and I tried to stay out of their way as much as possible. But it didn't take long for the situation to deteriorate. Margaret, Jack's mother, began to criticize everything I did. She would comment on the way I cooked, the way I cleaned, even the way I dressed. Nothing I did was good enough, and her constant nagging wore me down. I tried to talk to Jack about it, but he brushed it off, telling me that Margaret was just old-fashioned and set in her ways. "It's not that big of a deal, Emily," he said one night as we lay in bed. "She's just trying to help. Don't take it so personally." But it was personal. Every comment, every snide remark felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I began to dread coming home from work, knowing that Margaret would be there, ready to pounce on any mistake I made. Harold was no better. He would sit in his recliner, watching me with a critical eye, never saying much, but his disapproving glances said it all. The tension between us grew, and I started to feel like a stranger in my own life. I missed the days when it was just Jack and me, when we were happy and carefree. But now, those days seemed like a distant memory. One afternoon, after a particularly harsh exchange with Margaret, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to get out of the house, even if just for a little while. I grabbed my coat and headed for the door, but before I could leave, Jack stopped me. "Where are you going?" he asked, his tone sharp. "I just need some air," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll be back soon." Jack's eyes narrowed. "You've been acting strange lately, Emily. What's going on?" I hesitated, not sure how to explain what I was feeling. I'm not happy here, Jack. Your parents, they're making me miserable." His expression hardened. You need to stop being so sensitive. They're my parents, and they've done a lot for us. The least you can do is show them some respect. Respect? I repeated, incredulous. Jack, they treat me like I'm some kind of servant. I can't do anything right in their eyes. That's enough, Emily, he snapped. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Now stop being dramatic and go apologize to my mother. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The man I had married, the man who had once been my best friend and biggest supporter, was now siding with his parents against me. I felt a cold wave of despair wash over me as I realized that I was completely alone. But I couldn't bring myself to apologize. Instead, I left the house and drove aimlessly around town, trying to clear my head. I didn't know what to do or where to go, but I knew I couldn't go back to that house, not right now. As I drove, my thoughts raced. How had things gotten so bad? How had my life, once so full of love and happiness, turned into this nightmare? I didn't have any answers, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't keep living like this. When I finally returned home, it was late, and the house was dark. I crept upstairs, hoping to avoid any confrontation, but Jack was waiting for me in our bedroom. Where were you? He demanded, his voice low and angry. I needed to clear my head, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. Don't you dare walk out on me like that again, he said, stepping closer. We're married, Emily. You can't just run away every time things get tough. I'm not running away, I shot back, my frustration boiling over. But I can't keep pretending that everything's fine when it's not. Your parents are making my life a living hell, and you don't seem to care. Jack stared at me, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought he might say something, anything, to make me feel better. But instead, he simply turned his back on me and climbed into bed. Go to sleep, Emily, he said, his voice cold and distant. We'll talk about this in the morning. But we didn't talk about it in the morning or the morning after that. Days turned into weeks, and the tension between us only grew. Jack became more distant, spending long hours at work and avoiding me whenever he was home. I felt like I was disappearing, fading into the background of my own life. Then, one day, everything changed. I was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, when I overheard a conversation between Margaret and Harold. They were talking in hushed tones, their voices barely audible, but I could hear enough to piece together what they were saying. She's not going to last much longer, Margaret said, her voice filled with disdain. Jack's getting fed up with her too. It's only a matter of time before he leaves her. I hope so, Harold replied. She's been nothing but trouble since she moved in. We should have never let Jack marry her. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. They wanted me gone. They had been working to turn Jack against me, and it was working. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, but I blinked them back. I couldn't let them see me cry. That night, after Jack had gone to bed, I stayed up, thinking about what I had overheard. I knew I couldn't stay in that house any longer. It was toxic, and it was destroying me. But leaving wasn't going to be easy. I had nowhere to go, no family nearby, and no idea how to start over. But I knew I had to try. I couldn't let Margaret and Harold win. I couldn't let them destroy my marriage and my life. I had to find a way out. The next day, I began making plans. I reached out to an old friend who lived a few hours away and asked if I could stay with her for a while. She agreed, and I felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe I could escape this nightmare after all. But as I was packing my things, Jack walked in. He took one look at the suitcase on the bed and his face darkened. Where do you think you're going? He asked, his voice dangerously calm. I'm leaving, Jack, I said, my voice trembling. I can't do this anymore. Your parents, they're tearing us apart. Jack's expression softened for a moment, and I thought he might actually listen to me. But then he shook his head. You're not leaving, Emily, he said firmly. We're married. We promised to stick together no matter what. I know, but this isn't what I signed up for, I replied, struggling to keep my composure. I love you, Jack, but I can't stay here. Not like this. He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. But then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone, replaced by cold indifference. "Fine," he said flatly. "If you want to leave, go ahead. But don't expect me to come after you." His words cut through me like a knife. I had hoped that he would fight for us, that he would finally see what his parents were doing and stand up for me. But he didn't. He just stood there, watching as I packed the last of my things and walked out the door. As I drove away from the house, I felt a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, fear. I had no idea what the future held, but I knew I couldn't go back. I had to find a way to rebuild my life, on my own terms. The days that followed were some of the hardest I've ever experienced. I stayed with my friend, Zrenia, trying to piece together what had happened and figure out what to do next. I missed Jack terribly, but I knew that going back to him would only lead to more pain. One evening, a few weeks after I left, I received a call from Jack. My heart raced as I answered, hoping against hope that he had finally realized what he had lost. "Emily," he began, his voice hesitant, "I've been thinking a lot about what happened and I want to talk." "Okay," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you want to talk about?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could hear him take a deep breath. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I'm sorry for everything. For not standing up for you, for letting my parents get between us. I should have been there for you, and I wasn't." Tears welled up in my eyes as I listened to his words. This was what I had been waiting for, what I had desperately hoped for. But even as he spoke, I felt a sense of caution. Words were easy, but I needed to see if his actions would match. "I appreciate that, Jack," I said quietly. "But I need to know, what's changed? Why now?" He hesitated, and I could sense his struggle. "I miss you, Emily," he admitted. "I've realized that I let my parents' opinions influence me too much. They've always been controlling, but I never saw it until now. I want to try again, but this time, just the two of us. No more interference." His words tugged at my heart, but I knew I had to be strong. "Jack, I need time," I said, my voice steady. "I need to see that you're serious about this, that you're willing to stand up to your parents and put our relationship first." "I understand," he replied. "Take all the time you need. I'll wait." Over the next few weeks, Jack and I talked more, slowly rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. He kept his promise, distancing himself from his parents and making it clear that our relationship was his priority. It wasn't easy, but we were both committed to making it work. Eventually, I agreed to move back in with him, but this time, we found a place of our own, a small apartment in the city, far from the influence of his parents. It was a fresh start, and for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about our future. As the months passed, we grew closer, stronger, and more united than ever before. The experience had changed us both, but it had also taught us the importance of standing up for each other and not letting anyone else dictate our lives. Looking back, I realized that what we went through had made us stronger. It wasn't the path I had expected to take, but it led us to a place where we could truly be ourselves, free from the shadows of the past. And in the end, that was all I ever